Many Jews today feel the need for a Jewish renaissance. People are searching for a more vital and authentic mode of Jewish expression, and more than ever we need to shift, not only physically but spiritually, out of exile mode. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are speaking with the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
Many people do not shave or get their hair cut during Sefirat HaOmer. What about Kavod Shabbat? Is it permissible to shave or get a haircut L'Kavod Shabbat?
This is a very interesting question when one begins to analyze the issues under discussion, because the first thing we need to know regarding this practice is that it is not a halakha. In other words, Hazal do not anywhere state that a period of mourning was instituted to commemorate the Bar Kokhba revolt, nor do they state anywhere that a period of mourning was instituted to commemorate the death of the Talmidim, the students of Rabbi Akiva. It is well known what the Talmud Bavli in Masechet Yevamot writes, that during this period between Pesach and a little bit before Shavuot, many thousands of students of Rabbi Akiva died. According to the standard text which most people have before them today, in that Sugya and Yevamot in the Talmud Bavli, the reason given is because the students of Rabbi Akiva did not respect one another, did not deal with respect for one another correctly, and therefore they were punished and died in some kind of plague. I have pointed out on previous occasions that this is apparently not the authentic version of what the Talmud states regarding the death of the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, because we find in a document known as Igeret Rav Shrira Gaon, by one of the greatest and last of the Gaonim of Bavel, he writes, quoting that section of the Talmud in Yevamot, he writes that they died in war, in a violent cataclysm, which he refers to as Shemada, which does not mean a plague or disease or anything of the sort. So it seems that that statement in Talmud Bavli is a later and revised edition, a version which is not an accurate picture of what happened. There was, at that time, the period of the year between Pesach and Shavuot, there was in fact a great amount of bloodshed in the Jewish people at that time because of the war that was going on between the Jews of Eretz Yisrael and the Romans. And this revolt, the revolt known as the Bar Kokhba revolt, resulted in tremendous, almost unimaginable destruction throughout Eretz Yisrael. The historical sources tell us that 580 settlements and towns of the Jews in Eretz Yisrael were destroyed, and that 500,000 Jews were killed and many more sold into slavery, etc. The point being that none of this, despite what we know about these things occurring, and despite the fact that many of the students of Rabbi Akiva were involved in this war with the Romans and met their death during the course of that war, despite this fact, Chazal do not mention any notion of commemorating this event by certain forms of aviluth, of mourning practices during this time of the year. And therefore, with regards to the question that you ask, it cannot be the case, it is simply impossible that a minhag which grew up amongst the people, no doubt in order to, despite what we just said, to commemorate these tragic events, such a minhag, such a custom cannot override the clear halachic obligation, the mitzvah of kavod Shabbat, and therefore it is correct and proper. Not only is it mutar, not only is it permissible, it in fact is required, in my view. It is a mitzvah to do so, and it is an averah. It is incorrect not to do so. It is required that a person cut his hair or shave his beard during this period, lichvot Shabbat, as one would do during any other period of the year. This, of course, I should add, is assuming that we're talking about shaving in a manner which is permissible according to halakha, and I will just, without going into the details now, I will just state that I personally do not consider, as many Rabbanim in fact do not consider shaving all parts of the beard with an electric shaver. I do not consider that to be permissible.
Is it not the case that according to halakha, one should not shave even lechvod Shabbat during the period of the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av?
To put it simply, the answer to your question is no, it is not the case. It is true that the minhag of the Ashkenazim, since medieval times at least, has been not to shave or cut one's hair for 3 weeks, including before Shabbat, leading up to Shabbat, for 3 weeks. And this would seem to contradict what I'm saying, but in fact the question needs to be reversed. Is that practice, is that custom in fact legitimate? Here again, we do not find that Hazal instituted a period of mourning for the Hurban and for the death and destruction that was caused in Eretz Yisrael and to the Jewish people's hold on the country as a result of that war. We do not find that Chazal instituted a period of mourning which lasts a number of weeks, in other words, which would include Shabbat. This is not the case. What the Mishnah discusses at the end, the last perek of Ta'aniyot, is that the week of Tisha B'Av, Shavua Shehal Tisha B'Av Liot Bethocha, the week in which Tisha B'Av falls, those days of that week starting on Sunday and up to and including Tisha B'Av, during those days it is forbidden to cut one's hair or to shave. So if, for example, Tisha B'Av falls on a Thursday, so that week, from the beginning of that week, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, Tisha B'Av, we are not allowed to cut our hair or to shave because of the aveluth regarding the Hurban and the war and the destruction of Eretz Yisrael. But nowhere do Hazal suggest that this should override Kavod Shabbat. In fact, quite the opposite is the case. It goes on to state in that Mishnah quite explicitly that if Tisha B'Av falls on Friday, something which at that time was possible according to the calendar as it was then set up, then on the previous day, Erev Tisha B'Av, on Thursday, then the Mishnah says people are to wash their clothes if necessary, Lichvot Shabbat, and to shave and cut their hair, Lichvot Shabbat, for the Shabbat that is about to be upon them immediately following Tisha B'Av. In other words, even Erev Tisha B'Av, the Mishnah tells us that Kavod Shabbat overrides, for obvious reasons, because Shabbat is Minat Torah and Kavod Shabbat is Minat Torah. These concepts override the concept of Aveluth, which in this case is not a minhag as Sefirat HaOmer is, but rather a din gamur. This is clearly a halakha, that we must mourn the Hurban and the destruction of Eretz Yisrael at that time, but not at the expense of Kavod Shabbat. And I in fact have for, I would say, decades now, I have wondered about this, how such a minhag could have grown up. And I've asked many Rabbanim this question, and I've never been given any kind of convincing and reasonable response. The only possible explanation that I've come up with as to how this minhag of mourning for several weeks, which therefore must run into and clash with the concept of Kavod Shabbat, the only explanation I think could be that perhaps in those days in medieval Europe, people did not, obviously Jews did not shave, They trimmed their beards occasionally, but probably only every few months. And they probably didn't cut their hair every week or 2 weeks either, and therefore going 3 weeks in such a fashion was not any kind of obvious and blatant lack of kavod Shabbath. But nowadays, when some people perhaps get their hair cut more frequently, or people who shave regularly, to enter Shabbath in such a fashion where one looks really literally like a mourner with a stubbly beard, what's called like a Sefirat beard or a Aveluth beard, that is clearly the opposite of the requirement, the halachic requirement of doing things and preparing oneself lichvot Shabbath.
Is it not true that there are people who do not shave during Sefirat HaOmer, but do shave in honor of Yom HaAtzmaut?
You are very correct. There are such people, and this proves my point entirely. If it is obvious to these people that on a special day, and a day of celebration, such as Yom Tekumat Yisrael, also known as Yom HaAtzmaut, it is obvious to them that for such a day, in honor of such a day, they should shave during Sefirat HaOmer. How is it possible that it is not obvious to them that it is a kal v'chomer, it is simply so much more obvious that lichvot Shabbat, one should be doing exactly the same thing?
Why, in fact, did Chazal not institute a period of mourning to commemorate the Bar Kochva revolt and the destruction that came in its wake?
This too is a very interesting and, in my view, a profound question. It's not as if the Chachamim were unaware of the tremendous cataclysmic events that overtook the Jewish people at that time of Rabbi Akiva during the period of the revolt. That is far from being the case. In the Talmud Bavli, the revolt and its aftermath are not necessarily mentioned in great detail. It is mentioned to some extent, but in the Talmud Yerushalmi and in the Midrashim from Eretz Yisrael, where the events took place, Hazal speak at great length about the calamitous events and the destruction, the huge numbers of dead. Haruche Beithar is a well-known concept in the Talmud. So the question is really a very good one. Why, taking all this into account and knowing the historical facts that the destruction of Eretz Yisrael as a result of the failure of the Bar Kochva revolt against the Romans, the destruction was much greater than at the time of the Hurban, some 60 plus years before, then the question is only more obvious and more requiring an answer, and that is, why did Hazal not institute a period of mourning to commemorate that event? And another fact which one might point out is that, on the other hand, we know that there has been for a very, very long time, going back to at least the period of the Geonim, there has been a custom amongst the Jewish people, in many but not all parts of the Jewish world, that, for instance, amongst the Temanim originally there was no such practice. I know that for a fact. And the Radbaz mentions in a Teshuvah that he was aware of some communities, some Jewish communities, where this was not, this custom was not kept during Sefirat HaOmer, but in many parts of the Jewish world there was a custom to commemorate these events by some form of mourning. And we know that this goes back to the time of the Geonim, because we find in a Teshuvah, in Sha'arei Teshuvah, Siman Reish Ayin Heth, and we find in Rabbeinu Yeruham a Teshuvah in which he quotes Rav Hai Gaon, who relate to such practices. So, knowing these facts, if one then turns to the Rif and the Rambam and the Rosh, for example, and one notes that all of these posakim, obviously very deliberately, because they must have been aware of this custom, if it was known and well known in the time of the Geonim, it's impossible they should not have been aware of it, as their contemporaries were also clearly aware of it from what we see. Why did the Rif and the Rosh and the Rambam choose to entirely ignore this minhag? In my view, the intention of the Chachamim was that all these events, including Mered Bar Kochva, be remembered and mourned during the month of Av, and particularly during the days leading up to Tisha B'Av, the week of Tisha B'Av, as mentioned in the Mishnah. And I think it is most unfortunate that the Jewish people did not fully comprehend the intention of the Chachamim. And this actually leads me to another point. Today, we are recording this interview on Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day here in Israel, and it has been pointed out by many Talmidei Chachamim of the last couple of generations that the idea of fixing a day during the month of Nisan, the last days of Nisan, as it is now, the 28th day of Nisan, as a day of mourning and remembering the Shoah is, according to the Halacha, incorrect. We have in a statement in Masechet Soferim Perek Kaf Aleph that during the month of Nisan, because that was the month when the Mishkan was erected and the Nesi'im brought Korbanot to celebrate that fact, for that reason we do not say Tahanun or Nefilat HaPayim during the month of Nisan. That is a universal custom today throughout the Jewish world. And similarly, we do not say Hespedim during the month of Nisan. And therefore, why should we be commemorating the Shoah, Dafka, of all times, during the month of Nisan? And this, I believe, is a very correct criticism. The question, of course, is when should it be? When should it be commemorated? And the answer, I believe, is very obvious, on Tisha B'Av. And that is precisely the day when the Jewish people are in mourning, and we should mourn on that day all the various calamities that have befallen us. And this will also achieve, by the way, another very important fact, and that is that to many Israelis, unfortunately today, those who are very far removed from Torah and Halakha and Jewish tradition, Tisha B'Av is really a day which means absolutely nothing to them. It's a day associated with events that took place 2,000 years ago, a temple which they have no understanding of and they don't have any interest in, etc. And therefore Tisha B'Av is an anomaly to them, and they do not understand why we should be discussing such a thing, or studying why we should mourn such a thing. Whereas the Shoah is something much closer to us and something which they can relate to, many of them at least. And if Tisha B'Av was the day which was utilized for this purpose, the national day established by the State of Israel for commemorating the Shoah, that would also result in a much more correct attitude on the part of a very large portion of the Israeli public to the day and the days of Av and the day of Tisha B'Av.
Would it not make more sense to have a period of mourning during those very days when the disaster and destruction took place?
On the one hand, perhaps it would make more sense. But this is precisely the point that I'm trying to make. In my view, the Hachamim understood that it is impossible to have too many periods of mourning and for too long a period of time during the year. It is not healthy. Simply put, it is not psychologically and spiritually healthy. If one takes, for example, the practice of mourning for 7 whole weeks of Sefirat HaOmer, and add to that the minhag of the Ashkenazim of another 3 weeks of mourning leading up to Tisha B'Av, that comes to 10 weeks of the year, without even taking into account a few other minor fast days. 10 weeks of the year is approximately 1/5, that is to say 20% approximately of the year. to be in a state of mourning for a fifth of the year is simply unreasonable. It is not normal, and it is not healthy. Even if one only mourns during Sefirat HaOmer, up to Bar-Hayim, we're talking about well over a month, nearly 5 weeks. And add to that, if we add to that another 3 weeks, and again we're talking about 8 weeks, that's a very lengthy period of time. We find, for example, in Choth Evel and the Rambam, Perek Yud Gimel, the Rambam says that a person should not mourn his relatives who have passed away. He should not mourn them excessively, in an excessive manner, and for too long a period of time. Chazal instituted a certain number of days for the Shiva, which of course is 7 days, and for other expressions of mourning for 30 days. But to exaggerate, to go overboard, is unhealthy, says the Rambam, because it is the way of the world, and if a person mourns overly much the way of the world, then he is a fool, says the Rambam. Harei zeh tipesh, says the Rambam. In the same way, Hazal understood that it is unhealthy and unreasonable, and not just unreasonable or unfair, but it is actually spiritually, intellectually, psychologically detrimental, pernicious, baleful to instruct a people to spend such a large proportion of the year in a state of mourning. And therefore, it is my view that they deliberately refrained from declaring a specific period of mourning, which would be separate, a period of mourning that would commemorate the events of the Bar Kokhba revolt, that would be separate from the mourning period of the month of Av. And what they intended was that we should focus all our mourning during that one relatively brief period of the year, which lasts only from Rosh Chodesh till Tisha B'Av.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.